I personally love doing Instagram Live with you guys. I wish I could do it more often. It's so much fun to get to answer a lot of your questions and all the things that are going on in your space. This week I wanted to really talk about what's happening in the niche markets and what some of the brands are doing out there to really drive and get a little bit more engagement and get a little bit more going on with their businesses. Now, we all know that Instagram is certainly a huge channel for fashion businesses. In fact, these days, more and more businesses are launching directly on Instagram, actually having their Facebook counterpart accounts really there just as kind of a basic platform. But just the other week when I did the presentation and I co-presented the event with Condé Nast in New York, it was actually our conversation, which was supposed to be really driven on what's happening in terms of retail and reinventing retail and rethinking it, was actually ended up being a conversation that was primarily about Instagram. And it ended up being really about how brands these days are leveraging Instagram and using it in order to better help them with their businesses. And so today I wanted to talk about a couple different strategies and things that brands are doing to really help them with their Instagram engagement and to also help them develop and get more sales. This topic was also inspired by a recent article that Business of Fashion did that was really talking about a few different brands out there that are doing an amazing job. And the brands that they were discussing were Saks Potts, Magda Butrym, and Attico. And it was really interesting because in this article, when they were chatting about them, they were really talking about how these brands are leveraging the new way of brand building, right? They are leveraging a new way of getting their brands and getting more visibility. And retail buyers out there are looking, right? They're actually looking for new and innovative ways to be able to scout for product. Now, what's funny enough is during this conversation that I had with Condé Nast a few weeks ago, a very similar sentiment ended up popping up, which is that a lot of brands these days are leveraging Instagram, and editors and buyers and bloggers and influencers are really going to Instagram to try to find who these new brands are and what it is that they are doing that's so cool and interesting. So anyway, Instagram we all know is amazing, but let's start to dive in to what exactly these brands are doing that is really interesting and specific. So really, when you take a look at the Instagram accounts of, let's say, an Attico or Magda Byrne or Saks Potts, what you'll notice is that there is a real consistent theme here about being not only transparent, but also being able to show consistent images, right? Meaning you're gonna see things like, this is how we take images of our products. It's very behind the scenes. You get this impression that you're kind of with the brand as you go down their journey. You also get an idea of the inspiration. And remember, guys, each of your brand profiles are going to be very unique to what you are conveying. Certainly, each of these brands have their own unique voice and their own unique positioning. And while Instagram in the past was kind of seen as, this is where we're going to share behind the scenes, it kind of went into a little bit of a, let's say, evolution where all of a sudden all of the images you would see on Instagram are overly edited and everything became this platform for showing too much, right? And then you would over edit. And now I feel like Instagram is moving back into this direction of a cohesive conversation that's unique to your brand, whereby you are implementing things like behind the scenes images. You're also talking a little bit more about what's happening in the business, right? You're also doing a little bit more sharing. It's almost as if Instagram users are now taking a lot of what they love from things like Snapchat, which is divulging, sharing, making things a little bit more raw, and then taking that information and kind of translating that back into the Instagram platform. So I love that. Personally, I think each of these brands is doing an amazing job of conveying their own voice. So the other brand that BOF profile was called Magda Butrym, and what I thought was really interesting about this brand is they take a very different approach than Saks Potts. And guys, let me tell you, each of these brands have also been picked up by major accounts internationally, and they've all just launched within the last few years. So when you think about where you are in your business and your capacity to be able to grow, keep in mind, yes, you want to give yourself a few good seasons of pushing and pushing in order to see where you can head. But it is not that your brand has to be a heritage brand in order for you to be able to see some strong selling results. In fact, one of our clients right now is doing amazing business, and they're only just a few years old on sites like Matches Fashion and Intermix and Shop Off, etc. So in order to gain those accounts, it's not simply that you have to be around for a long time. It's that you have to have the right positioning, right? You have to be able to talk about your brand in a way that makes sense to your audience. So I want to chat with you guys a little bit about not just strategy, but also about how you develop your own voice on Instagram. Because as we mentioned, these few different brands that we're talking about here are all coming about their brands through very different positioning. And all of that needs to be organic. So I'm so sick and tired of watching, people talk about, well, these are the 5 things you need to do to boost your Instagram. These are the 10 things you need to do. What you really need to be doing is honing in on your specific brand voice and being consistent about how you're discussing and talking about that messaging. So for example, if I have a particular aesthetic of putting all of my images in white boxes and everything is framed, then I certainly want to make sure that I'm very consistent over time with that direction and with that way of positioning the product, or whether I'm talking about a press write-up, anything, right? Similar to how you would have brand guidelines for your website, you also need to be having brand guidelines for how you position your images and your content and even your copywriting on your Instagram platform. Now, there are a few different strategies I think that are important to evaluate. So number 1 is really looking at your Instagram channel like a pure transparent background. We're going to be raw, we're going to be upfront, but we're also doing cool things, right? If you're going to show the rawness of your brand, or you're going to show exactly what you've been up to, you need to be able to add some dynamic activity to that. So what does that mean? Well, specifically, that means doing things like going out, posting images of your brand in action, posting images of, places you're traveling to. Showing behind the scenes is only as useful as the content is. Otherwise, you can get a little bit of a boring behind the scenes, right? If you're just sitting behind your computer all day, I guarantee that no one's really going to care that much. But if you're actually showing that your brand is going places, if you're taking the viewer behind the scenes of your next appointment or your next editor meeting at Vogue, or behind the scenes at your next photo shoot, or behind the scenes at the airport where something funny or interesting happened, that kind of take and that rawness can be very good for your brand if that is the tone of voice and that is the level of familiarity you want to have with your consumer. Now, that is simply just one strategy. Certainly, if you take a look at Chanel's Instagram account, what you would find is that they, of course, show some behind the scenes, but it's very edited, right? It's not very raw. Of course, it's going to be really highlighting the best of what happened behind the scenes. And trust me, there's someone who's making a lot of money behind there who's able to manage it. But guys, I think from a deployment, the first way of looking at deployment is certainly through coming from a more transparent, raw, organic perspective. The second area of looking at Instagram deployment is going to be things that are obviously a little bit more polished, where you're curating the content in a more high level manner, meaning it's not quite fully transparent, but you are taking an extra level of editing your images and your content, so you're doing more storytelling. And then the third way is taking a very editorialized approach to your content. Now, when you take a very editorialized approach to your content, you kind of lose a little bit, especially as a small business, you lose a little bit of this, hey, we're in it together. And that's, I think, a strategy that a brand like Monsieur Gabriel did quite well. If you take a look at their Instagram and you take a look at the evolution throughout their launch, you'll notice that they very much had this perspective of, hey guys, we're in it together. You are in this journey with us. Now, if you take a look at it, it's certainly shifted, I think, to a more editorialized approach. Another niche brand that I think is doing great in terms of Instagram strategy is a company like Mayette, right? So Mayette is all sustainable luxury, and what I think they're doing great with is having a combination of showing their ethos, a little bit of behind the scenes, but they still maintain that kind of polished, edited quality. But they use their Instagram platform not only to showcase new products, but to really showcase the lifestyle. Now you're probably wondering, well, how do I showcase lifestyle and how do I showcase how fabulous my brand is if the brand itself is not, if the brand itself is very new? You know, how do you build up that profile? How do you build up that brand awareness? And so what I think is really valuable to think about here is what are all of the touch points that your brand can be engaging with on a regular basis? You know, what are the areas of your life that bleeds into the brand where you can take a brand-centric approach? Are you known in your brand as the head creative director? Is this going to be a hybrid of showing some behind the scenes and transparency, as well as kind of taking the user and the follower and your fan base through what your week is like as a brand? So think about your voice strategy and think about how you craft it, and then be consistent. I think the worst things and the worst offenders, the worst offenders out there are definitely the brands that are very inconsistent about how they're posting, especially when it comes to the voice direction of what they're talking about. Certainly your images will change in variation, and I think it's great to be able to show consistency, but also diversity. But without having a strong point of view when it comes to your copywriting, your hashtag strategy, etc., it can be looking a little disjointed. Meaning if you find yourself posting one-word sentences and you're wondering why no one really gets what you're doing, you might need to be adding a little bit more qualitative information to that, right? So I think that's certainly something to consider. Now guys, since we posted that we were doing this Instagram Live, we did get quite a few emails that came through, which I'm very excited about answering a lot of these questions. Please feel free to shoot over your questions to hello@scalingretail.com or post them here in the Instagram Live below in the comment box. I'd love to answer them. You know, today is all about talking about niche brands, you know, and that really means for a lot of these small business owners, which means a lot of you guys, a lot of the niche brands are things that are, you know, focusing on a particular point of view and focusing on a particular perspective, right? These niche brands aren't the brands that are launching in multiple categories at one time, right? They're really taking a small and focused approach. The other thing before I launch into these questions that I want to share with you is that taking a focused approach also means thinking about your distribution strategy. So certainly, and also your editorial strategy. So how you guys are disseminating your brand and through what outlets, and you know, who's covering your brand. And so when you think about things like distribution and where and what touch points your brand is on, I think one of the most valuable things to think about here is it's not just about being everywhere, it's about being in the right places. And when your content is curated and you're telling this great and consistent brand voice and image, and you're finding these different counterparts and channels of distribution points, what you'll find is chances are they're also echoing a very similar kind of niche messaging, right? For example, guys, Matches, Net-a-Porter, they have all increased their open to buys for emerging market brands. Now, why is that? Well, they realize that emerging brands certainly have their finger on the pulse. They're a little bit more nimble and can react to customer demands and also put forth new creative ideas that a lot of larger companies are failing to do. Now, why are larger companies lagging? Well, they're primarily lagging because their production time and the process of design, development, producing, distribution, etc. is much longer and more formal and also far more bureaucratic. If any of you designers out there have worked in any type of larger corporate company from a fashion design perspective, you'll find that innovative ideas are oftentimes brushed by the wayside in order to make room for a consistent product, right? In order to make room for that bestseller from last year because they need to comp those numbers. So when you think about the advantages of being a small business, certainly one of those things is your ability to really think outside the box and your ability to really do something that is unique and special, right? So anyway, so that is a little bit of stuff that I've been able to see not only in the market, but also things that I've been getting in terms of feedback from editors as well as buyers, right? You have the capacity as a small business to do something innovative. Why on earth you would choose not to? It's beyond me. All right, let me launch into the first question here. There is so much competition on Instagram. How can I make my brand stand out from the others? Great. I don't want to follow the usual advice because I feel like it's going to make my account like so many others out there. Okay, so I think this kind of goes back to our first question here, or the first idea, which is You need to be authentic. You need to have a brand voice that you're projecting, but you also need to be consistent. And so, what I think is great in terms of innovative strategies and ways of thinking about content management, is certainly to find your voice. And when we take a look and see what the different voices are and what kind of the status quo is of what it is you have to do or you don't have to do, certainly there are best practices. And so the best practices have to do with keeping uniform font. If you're going to be putting out brand image, make sure that every quote you put out there or every time you show your logo, it's very consistent, right? So make sure there's consistency. Also make sure the lighting is good, right? Like think about any other normal picture. Maybe it's a raw image, maybe it is a highly edited image, but if the lighting is shitty, then it's like, is anyone really gonna look at that image? So even if it is a very raw image, make sure it's certainly conveying the ideas and the feelings that you want to get across, right? And then lastly, really think about breaking the mold of just talking about fashion or product, and I feel like other brands are doing a great job of showcasing lifestyle, and I think lifestyle is important to think about here, but also, lifestyle beyond the brand, meaning every time you post an image, it doesn't have to relate exactly back to, well, and you can buy this product here on our site, or, and you can buy, you can find this over at this link. Having quality content or having something that's beautiful to look at or that's eye-catching and that's stunning, I think is a fantastic way of grabbing someone's attention. And in this land of Instagram, the big goal here is attention arbitrage, right? As one of my favorites, Gary Vaynerchuk, would say, it's about, getting the attention away from everyone else and making sure that you can capture the attention of your customer. And so by doing that on Instagram, it means having images and content that is going to be worthy of eyeballs, So it's not just about, hey, I'm going to post this boring photograph. How can you actually add some qualitative information to that that's going to make it a little bit more interesting? Because first and foremost, guys, Instagram is a visual asset, right? It is a visual platform. The other thing I think is important here, as far as not looking like anyone else, is starting to think about content management very differently than everyone else. So a lot of people have cadences. They're like, oh, every Monday I post this kind of content, every Tuesday I post this. And that's a very basic approach to thinking about Instagram. It's certainly not the more elevated approach. And the more advanced approach to being able to really stand out is to start to think about campaigns for your business, right? Campaigns are really going to be the next level up when you're looking at planning out Instagram, meaning I'm going to be doing shoots once a month. I'm going to be collaborating with different artists. I'm going to be collaborating with different photographers, with different models. And you start to take your brand from being inside, right? And you move it to being more outside, right? Your brand has got to take on legs outside of your myopic perspective, Thanks, Laurel. I love that you're loving this. But it's important to take an outside perspective. It's almost like when someone asks you about your business and how you're managing your business on your own, but yet you realize that you have a production assistant, you have a consultant, you have someone who's helping you manufacture, you have a team. Your brand is bigger than you. And it's very important, guys, that you start to take that concept and translate and push that out into social media. Who are the other people, if you can make a dream list of people to collaborate with, and start to look on Instagram for local photographers in your area. Start to take an idea of who are the local modeling agencies, who needs to do, TFP, trade for print. Start to really think about where the opportunities are for you to take your business beyond what you think it should be behind the scenes. Right? Because you guys, in order to grow your business, again, it has got to become bigger than you. And it doesn't mean that it has to cost a lot of money, but that is the next level when you look at leveling up your Instagram and really content strategy game in general. So one of the coolest ideas, I think, is to sit down and really think about your brand globally. What are all the areas of the lifestyle of your customer? What is he or she into? What are they doing? What is the lifestyle? What are they buying? Really start to take a look at your customer demographic and profile makeup, and then start to put together some different scenario plans, right? What is it that you could put together that would make for interesting content? Where is it that you can show a synergy between where your brand lies and then also where these other brands come together? So starting to think about brand connections and collaborations, I think, are a fantastic way of, again, finding new and refreshing content. I had one amazing client whose Instagram channel I think was so beautiful. I mean, just stunning images. And it was so visually pleasing and aesthetic that even before the brand launched, right, people were just following her because her stuff was so incredibly beautiful. And none of it was organic content. All of it was pulled from other places, but visually it stood for something, right? Visually she had all these beautiful colors from all over the world, and shown in mosques and shown in temples and shown in nature, and it was very, very stylistically rooted in kind of a very Middle East feel, but very magical. And what I love so much about that is it was able to really convey a strong brand message about her product, and it also set the tone and set the stage for when her business did launch. She now had a cadence for the type of images that she wanted to produce, and guess what? That was super helpful when it came time to shooting her first collection. So also think about, your Instagram channel as not just the platform for communication to your customers, but also to set the ground, right? To set the tone for anything you will be launching, right? To start to seed ideas in there. The other thing that I think is important, guys, of course, it has to fall in alignment with your branding and your brand strategy, but doing things that are unexpected. How can you show your brand in ways that are just not traditional or conventional, especially if that is part of your strategy, right? If part of what you stand for is something original and unique, then you would certainly want to be able to produce content that is original and unique. So don't be afraid to stretch the boundaries here. Jonathan, is a launch basically when your first collection releases? That's a really great question. So basically when you think about your first collection launching, the way that I think about a launch is the moment that you tell the world you can buy something from me. So whether that is telling the world, hey, you can buy something from me online, or you can buy something from me wholesale, the moment that you decide to tell the world that you can purchase from me, that is your launch, right? Everything before that is not a launch. The moment that you launch Instagram, that's not a launch, right? Chances are when you launch Instagram, you'll probably have some kind of landing page, right? Some kind of call to action for people to sign up for your newsletter, which is perfectly acceptable. But a launch is the moment where you are able to really get your product sold. And so when you think about, the samples are done, that is not a launch. When you think about your first photography is done, that is not a launch either, right? Your launch is really when the moment you're able to actually sell something. All right, guys, next question I have here. How can I leverage a strong and engaged social following to secure wholesale accounts? What is the best way to approach this? Okay, this is a really great question. So when you're talking about wholesale accounts, and this I think is a really slick idea here. So number one, wholesale accounts are not just the Net-a-Porters and the My Teresas and the Matches. So of course, being able to have bigger brands and being selective about distribution is an amazing way to go. Don't get me wrong. I think if you're looking at crafting a very niche and specific brand, then yes, you want to be very, very conscientious about what retailers are selling that product, right? If, for example, you are not looking at doing distribution in these really small capacities with these larger accounts, but maybe you're looking to start off small, so regionally. Maybe you're looking to start off on the more national level, looking at boutiques in different states. If you are not concerned about your over distribution, right, or you're not concerned about being in too many stores at once, then here's what I would do. I would go onto Yelp, which I think is an underutilized resource for a lot of brands, and I would take a look at boutiques regionally in the cities where you think your core demographics are going to be. Now, the reason why Yelp is so valuable is that a lot of mom and pop businesses do not have e-commerce profiles. Now, why is that? Well, ask yourself. I mean, isn't it hard enough to launch a brand, produce e-commerce, think about wholesale? I mean, you need staff, you need help, you need people to help you refresh your website, all of that, right? Business is difficult to manage when you are a small team. So when you're thinking about approaching and getting distribution to these smaller mom and pop accounts, I would take a look at something like Yelp, which I think would be amazing in terms of finding local boutiques. And then chances are, guys, these guys will also have an Instagram presence, because everyone nationally knows that Instagram is the way that you connect direct to your consumer. They will also probably have a Facebook page. Many of them will have both. Some will have one or the other. I would definitely use Instagram in this manner to reach directly out and direct message these boutiques, because these boutiques, chances are, the owner of the boutique is managing the social media account because it's a small company. Almost as if an influencer writes your brand, right, as a small business, you're probably going to be the one to write them back, probably not a social media account manager. Or if an account manager does respond on behalf of you, chances are they're going to reach out to you and say, hey Jonathan, so-and-so reached out to us about doing a collaboration, right? Or placing a wholesale order. Like, let's think about this. Let's take a look at this, right? So I think it's important to really take a step back and say, where are these accounts that I want to be pitching? Where is it that I'm able to actually make a direct relationship here and kind of bypass email? Every email is part of an amazing strategy to get your brand out there, but email is also just so bombarded, right? It's like, I think right now in my personal email account, I think I have about 18,000 emails, which is a lot of emails, I'm never going to get through all of them. Okay, so the other thing that I think is important is if you want to take the other approach, so we just talked about, getting into retailers that are more local, ones that are probably managing their own social, small teams. If you're thinking about approaching larger wholesale businesses and you're wondering how you can leverage your Instagram account and your following in order to really make that stand out there, I would say include in your pitch emails. You can say, hey, we have a great following on Instagram. We've been able to drive amazing orders through e-commerce. Or you can say, our collection's been getting amazing feedback on Instagram. X, Y, and Z influencers have been, posting about us, talking about us, etc. So definitely leverage your social following to be able to show a wholesale account why your brand might be a great fit. Now, keep in mind, guys, one thing that I think is really powerful here is when you're writing emails to wholesale buyers, not only are you going to include all the reasons why you have all this great social proof, but keep in mind, at the end of the day, a retailer is looking to make an investment, right? They're looking to hedge their bets. So you also have to show that you can sell, that you can distribute. In that recent Business of Fashion article that talked about these different niche brands and how well they're doing, one of the great quotes that came out of there, I think it was from Net-a-Porter, was, first and foremost, you've got to ship product. It's great to be able to have amazing followers on Instagram. It's great to be able to have this kind of niche following and grow your presence. But if you can't actually ship and you don't have good operations on the back end, it just doesn't flip and matter. You can have the coolest brand platform. You can actually have a great media outlet or a great media channel, but without actually having the right assets, to ship and to be able to produce on a consistent basis, all you have is a media platform, right? That is it. You don't actually have the business platform. Now, recently on Instagram Live, or on Instagram rather, I think we had a quote or a tip that, came from me, and it was something about, as a fashion company, you are first and foremost a media company. You are first and foremost designing content. And when you design your collections and when you think about what you're producing, you've got to think about it from a media-centric perspective. You've got to think about it from a, how is this going to photograph? How can I make sure this looks the best? How can I make sure that the colorways and the fabrics, etc., it has to all be translatable through your media. So whether that is if you are doing a collection of basic items, right, but you want to show them in really interesting and you want to show them in very different ways, you've got to think about the creative direction on your next shoot. Simply having a basic item that's shot against black and white may not be that eye-catching, right? So you got to have a very, very media-centric approach. So to circle back to finish up this question, I know we have quite a few more that I have to answer. But to kind of round out this question, I think the most important thing here is when doing your outreach, if you have an amazing, strong presence, certainly include those metrics, certainly include whatever it is that's going to show a retailer that, hey, you've developed social traction, you have current distribution, this is how you're set up on the back end, and make your emails and your pitches very business oriented. Think about your Instagram platform and strategy as simply proof of concept that people love your content, that people love your aesthetics. It is not proof of concept of people actually buying something, right? There's a very big disconnect here between the number of followers you have versus how many people are going to be actually converting through onto your website. If anyone has ever figured out the key answer to what that ratio needs to be, let me know. But to my understanding, there is no strong ratio here in terms of, how many followers you need to actually be able to get a certain amount of sales. We all know you can buy followers. We all know that that is not something that's very unique and special. But what is unique and special are the people who are engaging with you. What is unique and special are the comments. What is unique and special are the influencers and people who are talking about your brand and how you choose to disseminate and show that content on your own Instagram platform. Okay, how can I make sure that my account is seen by buyers scouring IG for fresh and unique brands? Ooh, great question. Okay, so when you want to make sure that your product is being seen, you want to make sure you've got a couple different hashtags, right? If you're in the middle of a wholesale selling campaign, certainly having things like SS, 17, fall winter 18, AW 18, spring summer 18, 19, 20, whatever season you're in, make sure that as you guys are talking about selling activities, that you are adding, right, these hashtags, because buyers are looking to see via these hashtags what's coming up, right? Now, of course, you also want to make sure you have a branded hashtag that has to do with your business, right? Because if someone ends up finding your brand and they want to see everything that's coming up with your brand, whether that is posted by you or an influencer or anyone else, then certainly having a branded hashtag would do well. Now, the hashtags that I think are worthwhile, but also I think you have to use these a little bit more sparingly, is when I see hashtags like, emerging designer, or when I see hashtags like independent designer, sometimes in my mind, like when I put my buyer hat on, I'm thinking like, all right, emerging designer, like that's cool that you're an emerging designer, but what does that really mean? Does that mean that you've been around for a while? Does that mean that you've been around, for a short period of time? What does that really mean to be an emerging designer? Even like an independent designer. There are so many of them. And sometimes when I hear words like emerging or independent, it makes me think like, okay, this company is like just getting started and they maybe don't have their stuff together quite yet. Like maybe they're just testing. Maybe they're not ready yet. Instead, what I think would be great is during wholesale selling seasons, right? You can certainly post in your comments, right? When you're posting images, let's say you wanted to be a part of Capsule or you want to be a part of a trade show, but you're not able to show there, right? Certainly what you can do is put in your hashtag, say something like, showing right now, fall, winter, showing right now, spring, summer 18, wish I could make it, but, not able to show at Capsule, this year, contact us for private appointments, something to that effect where if someone's going through and looking at tags from the different trade shows, right, they'll see your brand and go, oh, here's a new brand. Maybe they'll read your post. Maybe you don't say not showing at Capsule, but something like, contact us for private appointments, great seeing our friends at Capsule, etc., right? Something where it's a little bit more casual, but again, that your product or your brand is going to show up in that feed based on those strategic hashtags, right? So again, you can use things like emerging designer or independent designer, but to be honest, I don't really see that as something that is going to really get you the traction of some of the larger wholesale accounts. Maybe some of the smaller brands will be looking at emerging and independent. To be honest, I think if you're trying to do wholesale, really start to think about, strategically aligning your brand with larger activities that are happening during the selling season, right? So if you are going to be doing, private showroom appointments or private wholesale appointments, make sure that you have that listed in your copy when you're talking about all of the different kinds of activities that you're doing during the selling season. Thanks, Naeem. glad you're enjoying this, guys. It's always so much fun to share information. Okay, so next question I have here. What is a reasonable budget for social media photography? So yes, photography is important. And like I mentioned just a little while ago, guys, having the right photography is going to be critical when it comes to showing diversity, right? And when it comes to being able to show the different areas of your business that you're able to really highlight, And so I think photography can range. It can be anything from $500 if you're working with a local photographer just to get some cool flat shots, right? Maybe you guys go to the park, maybe you guys head to the museum. Right now where I am in Los Angeles, there's the Desert X that's happening in Palm Springs, and a lot of brands are heading down to Palm Springs and are grabbing their photographers and heading down there to be able to do some really cool, unique photographs. So maybe start to think about what are the other cool events, galleries, what is happening in your space and in your market that you can actually go and have your brand be a part of that. You are your brand. So having a photographer with you to do that is great. Now, let's say you have a decent budget and you're doing a more directed or editorial shoot on a monthly basis. You're probably going to be looking at around $5,000 a month, and that's not going overboard. That's pretty much on the conservative side. I would say most brands, when they pull off great photo shoots, meaning models from great agencies, a good photographer, editor, etc., you're probably looking at $7,500 to $10,000 a shoot. You can pull those off for about $5,000. But for those monthly kind of social media images, I would say maybe look on Thumbtack or TaskRabbit, or even, again, scouring IG for any great local photographers, I think would be an amazing way to start to get your product shots, right? And get some diversity. You don't want to just have your campaign shots from one collection be the only things that you post for an entire season. It's rather bland, right? You're going to get a lot of fatigue when it comes to visuals. Okay, next question here. How can I test my brand image on audiences? I have a really unique idea, but it's so new. How can I know that they'll love it? Ooh, that's a really tough question. Okay. How can I test my brand image on audiences? Okay, so when it comes to your branding and your brand image, I think it's really important to think about not only, number one, if you're not a trained designer or branding person or marketing person, it is really important that you get some outside feedback and that you get some guidance in terms of what it is that you're really pushing out there in terms of your branding. It is not easy these days to go through the process of building a brand, launching it, and then having to pivot and change rather quickly. In fact, chances are you're going to want to be looking at your brand, getting some consultants or outside perspective, and making sure that you're kind of properly situating your brand image and your cadence, so meaning the consistency of your images, your mood boards, the different kinds of images you want to be pushing out there, and then have some self-reflection moments, get some experts to kind of chime in before you put it out there. You are not going to know how people respond to your branding for a few months, right? And that means a few months of actively engaging. It means a few months of hashtagging, writing the right copy, being consistent with posting, twice a day, 3 times a day, and making sure that you are actually pushing your brand out there. It is only after you've really, balls to the walls this thing, that you're going to be able to see how your brand is being perceived, right? If people are responding to that. In the beginning few months, you should start to see people strategically liking some photos more than others, right? Probably depending on the quality of the image, depending on, the copywriting, etc. Like all of those things you're going to be able to see after you've been testing for a while. It's almost like similar to Facebook ads, right? With Facebook ads, you launch an ad and you want to say to yourself, all right, well, how do I know if it's working? Like what's the real ROI here? Right? It's only after you've been running strategic Facebook ads for about 3 months, where you've been trying different copy, different targeting, where you've been actually, putting budgets in different capacities, different images, etc., that you're actually going to be able to see what of the ads are working the best for you or not. So these things, again, take a lot of time, and I think it's really valuable to be able to push forward with an Instagram platform, get some feedback, and then make some slight pivots and continue to iterate and improve. All right, guys, last question here. Is it possible to run a successful line based on only a few pieces per collection? What are the benefits or drawbacks? Okay. And remember, guys, if you have questions about Instagram strategy or building up your business, please feel free to add your questions into the comments below. More than happy to answer a few more of them before I sign off. But let me answer this one. Is it possible to run a successful line based on only a few pieces per collection? Okay. So when it comes to launching and it comes to having a collection, remember that it is all in how you position it. If you have a business model, this all comes back to business modeling, right? If you have a business model whereby you are releasing a new product a month, it's direct to consumer, you're building hype, anticipation, and you're really building this kind of consistent, closed loop feedback between your customer, your brand, your e-commerce, and your product development, then you're actually doing something very innovative and interesting. But it does take having quite a bit of planning, right? So that's one business model. The other business model is you launch a few pieces each season, right? So if you launch a few pieces each season, then of course you're going to want to make sure that you've crafted those pieces to tell very specific stories, right? So why only these few pieces, right? What is the purpose of these few pieces? What was so artfully designed and detailed and thought about, and how are you showing how special that is through all of your advertising and branded campaigns? So anything is possible, right? It's not that you have to launch full-scale collections each season. However, if you are looking to get bought by larger wholesale brands, by larger retail companies, and you do want to have an assortment and you want to really grow and you see your business, really taking off and starting to hit that $1 million mark in terms of revenue, then it is going to take to have a little bit of a wider assortment so that you are able to be more things to more people. I can tell you firsthand, Intermix is going to buy differently than Matches, which is going to buy differently than Net-a-Porter, which is going to buy differently than Neiman Marcus, and which is going to buy differently from Bergdorf's or Nordstrom's, right? So to simply say that you're going to have these few pieces and you're going to try to really scale up your business based on these few pieces, it's going to be rather challenging from a wholesale perspective, right? Certainly if it is something that is, like Spanx, for example, or if it's something that's more utility-based, right? And you're like, these are the most amazing pair of X, right? Or you're coming at it from the perspective of bonobos, which is, I revolutionized khakis, right? But certainly, eventually, they all diversified, right? They started off with one or two things, diversified in colorways, diversified in assortment. So all of that is really important. Hi, Allison. Awesome. Great to have a final question from you. Okay, so how should we use Instagram differently from Facebook? Oof, that's a really great question. Facebook is so different these days, guys. Facebook is a totally different platform that's being used so differently. And what I mean by that is on Facebook, when you're thinking about delivering content, right? You've really got to be thinking about delivering content on Facebook in a way that is pushing out not just images, but in a way that's also pushing out other types of blog content, other types of articles, ways in which you're really showing, again, the lifestyle of your brand. As a media company, all of your social media platforms have got to be bigger than just selling product, right? So the way that I would focus and diversify the content would be certainly Facebook has a very different end game user, meaning in order to really build a Facebook strategy, you have to be running ads that are going to help build up your page, profile. That you get more likes, more people are following you. Once you start building up those number of followers, then the next piece of content, right, has to be, or the next kind of advertising has to be geared towards engaging them, right? So offering to people who follow your page different kinds of discounts, coupons, different forms and methods of engaging with your brand. On Instagram, it's a little bit different. You know, we're not yet able to do retargeting on Instagram advertising, right? And retargeting is really primarily done on Facebook. So when you think about, you know, the content, you really also think about how the advertising is different, because you want to build up content on platforms that you plan to advertise on. If you don't, then you're simply not making good use of the capacity of that platform, because certainly someone who is on Facebook, who sees a Facebook ad, is probably going to come over to your Facebook profile and kind of see what you have going on there, even if your Facebook ad is really geared towards having them click out. So if you're focused on Facebook ads, you have to be focused on a Facebook digital marketing organic platform. That means not only having product content, but also engaging with those users in a more dialogue capacity. You know, what do you guys think about this? Let me take you behind the scenes of product development. You know, what do you guys think about these two different patterns? You know, what do you think about, you know, I'm going on this trip. Here's some behind the scenes. Also using Facebook Live, I think, as a very different strategy is important as well, because Facebook Live, again, is going to allow you to repeat and show the content over and over again. So on Instagram, for example, once you guys are off of this, it's no longer on Instagram. Right? On Facebook Live, if you take someone behind the scenes of your business or your brand, you're certainly going to be able to see them and see that content live on much longer, right? So I think it's really important to think about the platforms which you choose to engage on. Now, obviously on Facebook, you don't need to be posting multiple times a day. The algorithms are different, which is why it's important, if they are focusing on that, to continue to have a Facebook ad spend, even if it's marginal, you know, just to continue to get people to see your ads, to see the content. It's not always promoting the page either. You might be promoting a blog post, you might be promoting other kinds of content. On Instagram, think of that as like a real pure play on visuals. You know, what you see is what you get. You know, maybe they'll see the first few lines of the copy that you have, so you got to make sure you're saying something interesting. But really, if the image doesn't stand out, the image to copy ratio on Instagram is so much different than on Facebook. That on Facebook, you can kind of get away with writing more copy, you know, not having the most powerful image. Or on Instagram, if you don't have the right images, right, and it's not really telling the right story, then you're going to lose out on that customer. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for joining. It is always a pleasure to share with you guys journeys down Instagram Live and talk about your businesses and talk about all the things about what you can be doing to really elevate your business. You know, right now we're working on an amazing project with the United Nations, and we're working on a social media strategy for a Pashmina collective, which is out of control, and it's so amazing. And I'm telling you guys, the art of content planning, the art of telling stories, and of building a brand is just as important as you went through logo development and as you went through designing your fonts and your website as it is for social media. You know, you want to pay as much attention to that as you can, because guys, this is where you need to be. This is where your customers are. All right, guys, I will talk to you later. I hope you have a fantastic day ahead. Please do keep in touch on the Scaling Retail blog, blog.scalingretail.com. Also, check us out on Instagram, of course, on YouTube. We'll have a replay of this on YouTube. But otherwise, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.